Hi, everyone. I'm Tim Seelig. I'm the artistic director of the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus. As you may know by now, about a year and a half ago, we bought a building in San Francisco and we began the National LGBTQ Arts Center. And we were just about taking off and starting our programming. We had started a behind the curtain event with the cast of Hamilton, and it was amazing. And we had some great people lined up to come in and do these behind the curtain interviews when all of a sudden we have COVID-19 instead. So now we're doing them via Zoom. I could not be happier today than to introduce to you a friend of mine and of our community and one of the greatest activists of all time. Welcome, Cleve Jones. And we're going to clapping out loud on Zoom. Clapping's bad on Zoom. They don't like it. Welcome, Cleve.
Thanks, Tim. It's great to see you. I'm glad you're well and safe.
Thank you. And so, Cleve, tell us where those beautiful flowers are behind you.
I'm speaking to you from Guerneville, California, where I've been sheltered in place since March 8th. And I feel very, very privileged and lucky to be in such a beautiful area. I'm surrounded by natural beauty, the redwood trees, got a lot of roses here, and I've put in a vegetable garden because I have a feeling this thing's going to go on for a while.
Well, I'm glad you're growing your own vegetables. Yeah, of course, we're worried about the food train and how we're going to get all of our things. You lived in the Castro before this.
Yes, I still have my place in the Castro. I wasn't really planning on being up here for such a long, sustained period, but my partner and I just felt by the first week of March that it would be safer for me to be up here. As you probably know, I'm a long-term HIV survivor. Like you, I'm no spring chicken. And also, I used to smoke cigarettes when I was young and stupid. And so I just felt like this was not a thing I wanted to take any chances with.
Yeah, I just had the double whammy of being really old and HIV positive. I didn't smoke because I was a singer and a choir director, so right. I didn't go through that phase. So I'm a double and you're a triple whammy. So we are here just to celebrate you, of course, and on this very, very special week of all weeks. And I can't even imagine what your thought process is of commemorating Harvey Milk's 90th birthday. How's it feel?
Well, it's such a odd thing, and it's kind of related to the way I feel about my friends who passed from HIV during the horrible years of the pandemic before there was treatment. We lost so many people, and they're kind of frozen in time as they were when they were young. And I often look at the photographs of my friends who didn't make it, and they're still in their 20s and 30s. And then I have to remind myself, oh my goodness, they would be in their 60s and 70s now. But to think of Harvey as 90, it's very surreal for me. He is still so much an active presence within me, within my thought process. I don't think a day goes by when I don't think about him one way or another. Obviously, knowing him and working with him was probably just about the most significant thing that ever happened to me, and completely changed my life.
How you met and what that was like, and then how your relationship ended on that day.
Well, I can't pinpoint exactly the date I first met Harvey, but I'm sure it was at the corner of Castro and 18th Street, where he was always passing out leaflets and registering voters. When I first met him, he still had a ponytail, and I didn't really take him very seriously. He seemed a little old to be a hippie, and he called himself a small business owner. And when he first started running for office, that was his, ballot designation. And I didn't have much use for the merchants on Castro Street at that time. It was still very much a heterosexual, Most Holy Redeemer Parish kind of organization. But he was very funny, and I've always really appreciated people who have a sense of humor. He was from New York. He had that kind of East Coast edge a bit. And I gradually started to really think this guy was funny. that was probably in 1974 or early 1975. Then I got wanderlust, and I stuck out my thumb and I started hitchhiking. I hitchhiked up to Vancouver and across Canada, and hopped on a plane to London, and spent most of 75, 76, and 77 hitchhiking around Europe and the Middle East, and corresponding with people back in San Francisco, including Harvey. And I happened to be in Barcelona for the first gay pride march there, which was attacked by the police and turned into a very bloody riot. And I wrote an account of this and sent it to Howard Wallace, who gave it to Harvey Milk, who then had it published in the Sentinel, which was a LGBT newspaper at the time. So when I got back to San Francisco, I discovered that I had been published. And that was a really big deal. We were getting ready for the Briggs Initiative, which was Proposition 6, which would have banned gay people from working in the public school system. And Harvey recruited me to organize students to fight that. So that, I really only had a year of working closely with him, but he also basically bribed me to get me to go back to school. He was adamant that I had to get a college degree, and he knew that I had the attention span of a lima bean. So he bribed me with an internship and said, if you go to school, I'll give you an internship. But I wanted to be a film director.
I was going to say, I've done a little research, and I know you were going to go to film school. And then what happened, Cleve?
I made a little film, and I showed it to him, and he said, Cleve, you have no talent at all. You need to change your major. So I transferred from City College to San Francisco State, enrolled in the political science department. He got elected, took me with him to City Hall, and I got to work with him for 11 months until November 27th, 1978.
So before we get to that, tell us a little bit about those 11 months. Was it just, what was it like? Was it wild and crazy, or was he all business oriented? What was that like?
Well, he's one of these people who really didn't discover who he really was until rather late in life. And he'd had many incarnations. He'd been in the Navy. He'd been a Goldwater Republican. He'd worked in the stock market.
He worked behind the scenes on a Broadway play or two.
Yes, he was involved with the production of Hair.
Right.
So he tried on many different personas, and then he became his true self. And so there was a personal excitement within him that emanated outward. And he had I think perhaps because he'd struggled so long to find out who he really was, he had a great genuine empathy an ability to connect with all different kinds of people. He could hang out with homeless people that were pushing shopping carts. He could hang out with wealthy white ladies from Pacific Heights. He could hang out with bartenders from the leather bars and firefighters and Teamsters. He just had this really amazing ability to connect with people and to draw people out and to find commonality and common ground. And I think that probably was the single most important lesson I learned from him. He had a temper. He could be really risque and sometimes borderline crude in a way that I quite appreciated.
Right.
And he was very kind to me. At that time, my biological father and I were really still not speaking. My father had reacted very badly when I came out. And so Harvey was he was more than a mentor. He was kind of a father figure. And I should say, I was not the only young person. He was a mentor to many, many young people, young men, young women, gay and straight alike. He really had a mission to encourage young people. If there's any young people listening to this who are having trouble with their parents, I think that I would encourage them to leave the door open, because later, many years later, more years than I would have liked, my father changed. And by the time AIDS came, my father was on my side. My father was fighting for me.
Wow. Well,
And
thank you.
yes, so I know many young people still go through this and experience rejection from their families, from their churches, but that can change. That can change. So leave the door.
It takes time. Good things take time,
Yeah.
as they say. But it's so. Tell us briefly, as briefly as you want, because I don't want you to have to relive this. But tell us about the day you found him.
It was November 27th, 1978. I think it was the day before Thanksgiving that year. At any rate, it was the week of Thanksgiving. Harvey had two paid staffers, Dick Pavich and Ann Cronenberg, and they were off visiting their families. I think Dick was in Wisconsin and Annie was up in Seattle. So I got there early. I wanted to show Harvey that I was useful. And when I got to City Hall that morning, it turned out I'd left a file in my apartment that he needed, and he was annoyed with me for forgetting it. So I was very upset that he was displeased with me, and he told me to go back to Castro Street and get the file and then come back after lunch. And as I was leaving, he could tell that I was crestfallen, and he stopped me and he said, "I'm sorry, it's just been a bad week, and I'm really on edge. I didn't mean to snap at you." And then he said that there was a picket line at the patio cafe, and that we knew the workers there were trying to organize. And as you know, I work for the labor movement, and it was the same union. It was Local 2 from the Hotel Employees and Restaurant Employees Union.
It's the same union?
Yeah, the same union I work for now. And so I went back to my apartment, which is in the building that is now the One Medical office on Castro Street, 593 Castro. Got the file, walked down the street, joined the picket line at the patio cafe, and then somebody yelled at me out of the window of the 24 Divisadero that someone had shot the mayor, George Moscone. And so I grabbed a taxi, got down to City Hall, entered on the Van Ness side, saw all the police swarming around the mayor's office, ran up those stairs that Harvey always said, you're not allowed to take the elevator. You have to go up that grand staircase as grandly as possible. And I just ran up there, and I had a key to the supervisor's chambers and the private hallway that the individual offices open to. And I let myself in and ran down the hall shouting, "Harvey, where are you?" And turned the corner and saw his feet sticking out of Dan White's office. And I'd never seen a dead person before. I've seen many since, but I was 24 years old, and it was just the most horrifying thing I had ever seen in my life. To see close up what bullets do to bone and brain tissue, and it was just horrifying. And I thought at that moment that everything was over. It just
Thank you for remembering. Yes, they'd been rehearsing for 4 weeks, and they showed up with their little folders and their music, and were asked to sing, which they knew one song, and they sang it, and it was kind of a tragic Mendelssohn piece. And then Ali Near shows up and had written another song and taught it to the guys, and now that song is now famous and infamous, "Singing for Our Lives." So I have one. It's just I've been listening to a lot of Cleve Jones today, because I just wanted to be in your mind and in your space before we shared this really, really precious time together. This is not where you think I'm going, or maybe all that history that happened to you, that one leading up to one fateful day. What is it in Cleve Jones that took all of that, and instead of "it's over" and walking away, what is it in you that woke up, maybe not the next day, maybe 5 days later or 2 weeks, and said, I'm not, this is not the end? And what is that made you then become one of our greatest heroes and activists?
You know, I've never given up. I think some of it comes from my mother. My mom was a very independent woman. She was born in 1921. So she grew up with the Depression, with World War II. Most of the young men that she knew from school, from elementary school through high school, went off to war. Many of them did not come back. Those who did return were damaged. But she kind of ran away from home, from Michigan, and went to New York City to be a dancer. And this was not something that young women typically did during that era. She left home by herself and went to New York City to dance, and met Martha Graham and was admitted into the Martha Graham Company. There's some wonderful photos of her dancing there with Martha. And you know, she was just living this life that she loved so much. And then one day on the way to rehearsal, she started coughing. And she began coughing up blood and went to the hospital, was diagnosed with tuberculosis, and sent off to basically die in a sanitarium. At the time, there were very little treatment. So what they did for people who had tuberculosis of the lung was they had to lie flat and had their lungs collapsed so that they could just rest. She lived like that for 2 years, and then she began to recover. She was allowed to leave, and they told her, you can't ever dance again. You can't have children, so you probably shouldn't get married. And she said, the hell with that, and married a guy that was almost 10 years younger than her, and went back to dancing and got her degrees and ended up running the dance department at Arizona State University and starting a dance company. And I just, she would always say when things got bad, she said, this too shall pass. I think that just became part of my DNA, that yes, you will go through hard times. You will suffer. None of us gets through this without suffering. None of us gets through this without pain and loss and tragedy, but you can endure it and you can get through to the other side. And then you have the privilege of seeing what comes next. And I think that was another part of this, was that even now, I want to see what happens next. And that day, as I sat in Harvey's chair and listened to his voice and thought, it's all over, it's all over. But then the sun went down and the people gathered by the thousands, and I stood in that huge throng and I realized it wasn't over, it was just beginning. And I wanted to see what would happen next.
Well, the young people today, one of those is, how do we, you and I as leaders, motivate them?
I think Americans in general have a tendency to be disinterested in history. I always loved reading history, and I'm glad I did. It equipped me, prepared me, but most Americans, I think, don't respect history. So I think as much as possible, part of my mission is to let young people know that what we struggle at. I've had conversations with young men. I still like to go out to the bars, and I love going to bars where there's a mix of the ages, and I go to places where there's people in their 20s and people in their 80s. And I want the young people that hang out on Castro to know that 20,000 gay men died of AIDS in the Castro during that period. And sometimes they look at me and they kind of go blank. But I try not to be too pushy about it, but many of them don't know that there was a time when we went to prison, when we were locked up, when we were taken from our families, when we were hunted down by the police. Even in liberal San Francisco, when I got there, about 2,000 gay men a year were being arrested and entrapped and arrested for sexual behavior between consenting adults, which was a felony. And they lost their jobs, they lost their families, they lost their homes, and many of them lost their lives. And so I think it's important to, as much as possible, communicate that history to our young people. And in my book, When We Rise, I know you're familiar with the agonies of trying to finish a book. And at one point, I remember lying in bed, just kind of hating myself and thinking, Cleve, you're a terrible writer, and why are you even bothering? And why do you want to write this book? And the answer came to me in one sentence. It was because the movement saved my life. And that is not hyperbole. That's not rhetoric. When I was a 15-year-old kid stealing pills from my parents, I was planning to kill myself because I didn't want to be a homosexual. And then I read in Life magazine, the year in review issue of 1971, and there was a whole 8-page story about gay liberation, and I discovered for the first time that there were other people like me. There was a community. There was a movement, that the movement was part of the larger movement for peace and social justice that my family and I had already taken part in. And I flushed those pills down the toilet and hitchhiked to San Francisco. And then many years later, when I was dying of AIDS, up here in Sonoma County, I came up here to die in the 90s, and ACT UP stormed the FDA and the NIH and got the medications released that saved my life. Again, not rhetoric, not hyperbole. The actual fact is I wouldn't be talking to you if it wasn't for the movement. And so I wanted to, my challenge with the book and also the mini-series was to try to craft something that would be readable for young people, that would be exciting, that would be sexy, that would be funny, so that they could learn these lessons that I think are so important.
If you're out there, I can't imagine that you're out there listening to this and have not read the book or watched the miniseries When We Rise, please make sure you do that. All right, so we're stuck here, sheltering in place. We've been here 2 months. Talk to me about, what do you see? I mean, you're a voracious reader. What do you see?
I see a long struggle ahead. There's so many parallels. There's differences and similarities between the two pandemics I've now had to experience. I think the most obvious similarity between HIV/AIDS and COVID-19 is that both emerged during the presidency of a Republican who failed to perceive the gravity of the situation. And so those precious moments at the beginning were lost. With AIDS, we had Reagan, who did not say the word publicly. His staff laughed openly about it. They made jokes about it. They said, let them die. He didn't say the word AIDS publicly until more Americans had died of AIDS than died in the entire Vietnam War. We're hearing that reference now because, of course, the number of people who died of COVID-19 in this country has now exceeded those who lost their lives fighting in Southeast Asia.
I was at a high school, a Zoom high school this week, and they were asking me this very same thing. And my perspective is the same as yours, but just a little, because in the mid-'80s, I began conducting a gay men's chorus. And there were days when those of us who were gay men's chorus conductors just assumed we would not have a chorus within X number of years because the rate of death among the men in the chorus was just so fast. We didn't think, we just had kind of given up and thought we're not going to have a chorus. Today, with COVID-19, it's different but the same in that we can't get together and rehearse. We can't have a chorus right now, not because everybody's dying, but because of the risk factors involved with singing. So we too are on hold until either a vaccine or a treatment that has been proven effective, which you and I luckily live with HIV.
Yeah, and we don't have a treatment, we don't have a vaccine, we don't even have accurate testing in place. So the failure of the federal government to lead this is pretty abysmal. He said he thought of himself as a wartime president, but if we'd been invaded by an actual army, would he tell the states they were on their own?
Right.
It's very sad.
No, he would not. I want to know from you, Cleve, what makes you have fun?
Bottom line, I like going out to the bars with my friends and having a couple of drinks and gossiping, and I'm a very social person, so this has been really challenging for me. When I live in San Francisco, when I'm in the Castro, it is impossible for me to be bored or lonely. All I have to do is open the door and go outside. To live in a neighborhood where I know so many people, where I have such history, is just the most wonderful gift. Most of my friends are not particularly political, but there's always just great conversation. I love that. I just love being in my neighborhood, and I like the options of being able to go to the theater for a concert or a performance, a play. That makes me very happy. Living in the city makes me very happy. So now I'm gardening.
It's different.
Mostly weeding, and I live in a beautiful space. I sure miss my friends, and it's Friday night. I just would like to go down to Castro Street and go to the Mix and stop by 440 and go to Twin Peaks, and yeah.
Just drop in. That's kind of what we do. We'll come visit Cleve in Guerneville. He's going to have a little vegetable stand down on the main road, on River Road. Well, there's Cleve Jones and his eggplants. It's going to be awesome. I can't wait. What's your favorite vegetable that you're waiting to pop out of the earth?
Well, actually, my favorite vegetable I'm harvesting right now, I have a gorgeous patch of artichokes.
This will make you feel better. You may want to start up a stand, because I bought 2 beautiful artichokes last weekend at the Whole Foods for $5 each.
Oh, I'm going to be rich.
You are. It's your new career for sure. Cleve, I can't thank you enough. I just can't.
I have such admiration for what you've done with the chorus. The chorus, we have so few institutions in our community that survive more than a decade or two. And so the chorus was very important to us long before you came to San Francisco. But what you've done there is amazing. You're a real visionary, and we're so fortunate that you found your way from Texas to the Bay Area. I think it's cute that we're both taking at least one page from my mother's life and falling in love with younger men. That'll keep us going.
There is something to be said for that, no question. And thanks for pointing that out. It's not a bad thing at all. I mean, we'd be kind of hard pressed to fall in love with older men than we are, but not impossible. But not probable either. Cleve, thank you. Thank you so much.
Stay safe, be well, and to anybody watching this, I hope you're all, your families are well and safe. Stay that way.
Thank you, Cleve. Have a great afternoon.
You too. Bye-bye.